Dobry dzień and welcome to Nash Holos Ukrainian Roots Radio, coming to you live here on CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. I'm your host, Pawlina. Our special guests today are Ukrainian-Canadian author Marsha Skrypuch from Brantford, Ontario, and Ukrainian-American author Chrystryna Lucyk-Berger from Austria. And we're in Austria.
I'm in Western Austria.
In Western Austria.
Right on the border to Switzerland.
Okay, wow. Right in the Alps?
You're right in the Alps.
Oh, sounds beautiful. First of all, I'd like to tell you that I've read both of your books, and they've both got 12-year-old girls as protagonists. Marsha, your book, Kidnapped from Ukraine Under Attack, is set in 2022 Mariupol in the first days of the invasion. And Chrystryna, your book, Swimming with Spies, is set in 2014 Crimea in the port city of Sevastopol. Both of these books were really hard to put down. Marsha, I read yours first, and I have to admit I was a bit reluctant to start, just to avoid more emotional pain from covering and following this war. I saw the film 20 Days in Mariupol and found it absolutely devastating, and your book starts at this same time. But once I opened it, just out of curiosity, I couldn't put it down. Chrystryna, I read yours right after Marsha's, and because it was set 11 years ago now, the emotional trauma wasn't quite so raw for me. Also, it's about dolphins. So,
Yeah.
Why don't I get each of you to give us a synopsis of your book?
Sure. So this is Marsha, and I wrote Under Attack, Kidnapped from Ukraine, and it's book one of a trilogy. And so book one is from the perspective of Daria, who is a 12-year-old twin to Rada. And she and her mother are separated from her father and sister on the first day of the attacks of Ukraine, and they're in an apartment in Mariupol. They're separated. They shelter in a basement for a while. Then they're put through a filtration camp and separated again. So the mother and the daughter are separated. And Daria is put through a re-education camp in Russia and then placed in a Russian home. And her mother needs to find her and get her back. They still don't know what's really happening to the other half of their family, which is what happens in Standoff, the next book. But that's what Under Attack is about. And I can understand why it was hard for you to read, Paulette. It was excruciating for me to do the research. I did watch the documentary, and it was very helpful. It helped me with about 5% of the research that I did for this. Because, to be able to do day-to-day, hour-by-hour scenes of a war that's happening now, with also keeping the people that really are in it safe, and putting a sheen of fiction over it to keep people safe who are currently suffering under this, was a big challenge.
Chrystryna?
Very much like Marsha, I was glued to my screen on February 24th, 2022, and absolutely brokenhearted. My story is, however, based on the 2014 annexation of Crimea. And my protagonist is Sophia. She's a 12-year-old. She's a marine biologist in the making and identifies herself as mostly Ukrainian after her Russian mother abandons her and her father. Sophia gets paid for doing the homework of her arch enemy, Ilya. But they have a huge fight, and the school disciplines both of them. And Sophia's father comes up with this project that pairs Ilya and Sophia together. And Sophia hates this so much, mostly because Ilya gets in the way, and also because she has a special connection to the dolphin pod, especially to the oldest dolphin, Colin. And when Ilya's father shows up, Sophia learns that Colin was once a military marine mammal, which is a dolphin spy, basically, who is assigned to protect the harbor or to sabotage enemy boats. So at the same time as Sophia begins learning that her family and Ilya have a dark past together, something that has to do with her mother's disappearance, actually, just as she's doing that, the Russians hold this sham referendum that leads Russia to annex Crimea. And Sophia is horrified to discover that the Russian Navy plans to take over the dolphinarium and her dolphin pod to create them or to repurpose them into military marine mammals. This is a true story, the part about the dolphins,
Hmm.
but Sophia and her family are not. And the story is then about how Sophia fights to make sure that that does not happen.
I remember reading about the dolphins vaguely. There was something in the news about dolphins. So, yeah, the fact that it's also based on a true story, it brought me, like Marsha's book, it brought me closer. It made it personal. Why did you write these books? Because I know probably you didn't want to.
So it's interesting because both Christia and I kind of wrote them for the same reason, and that was in my situation. Scholastic approached me, and when the war in Ukraine started, and they wanted me to write a trilogy set during the war, and the reason is that I have, a readership, and uh,
Mhm.
in the book fairs, they were saying my readership was actually asking for these books from me. And I initially said, no, I was too triggered and traumatized by the war to
Yeah.
think about writing about this war.
Mhm.
They came to me a few times and I finally said yes. And the reason that I said yes is because there was disinformation, very slick disinformation being targeted at young people.
Mhm.
And I felt that it was my moral responsibility to, no matter how much it was horrible for me. It's nothing compared to what people are going through. So this was a contribution that I could make.
My story is very similar to Marsha's, except that I was writing World War II
Mhm.
um, novels or historical fiction novels for adults. And one day, I have a very, very personal story that I'm not going to go into, but one day, because of this personal situation that I have, I decided that it was time to do something for kids. And I had been thinking about writing for kids for years. I mean, like decades, long, long time ago, but never really pursued it. And on that very same day, it was just too coincidental. I couldn't believe it. I got an email from Scholastic. Now, I teach English here in Austria, and I got this email, and I get a lot of solicitations for ESL books, which I know Scholastic also publishes. Um, and I got the email, and I saw, "Would you be interested?" And I thought, "No." And I deleted at the very same time as I finished reading the subject line, "Would you be interested in writing a middle grade novel set in Ukraine, in modern day Ukraine?" And I went, "What? Where did that email go?" So I fished it out of the trash immediately. And I read it, and then I thought, "This is just too strange of a coincidence." So I started researching the person who wrote it. I researched the email address, and Siri knows way too much sometimes. And so I really checked it out. And 5 minutes later, I wrote back and I said, very, my heart's racing, but very soberly, I said, "Yeah, sure. What you got? Tell me what you wanted me to do." And then immediately I got a concept back, and it was 12-year-old Sophia, which I kept because I love the name. Dad's a Ukrainian dolphin trainer. Dolphins repurposed for military marine mammal after the Russian sees it. Would you be interested in hooking the story on that? And I just went, "Oh my God, yeah." And we had a telephone conversation that day. No, actually, sorry, a couple days later, and I sent the first 3 chapters. Um, and I have to say, I was tremendously honored because everybody knows Scholastic, everybody does, and I thought this is a huge game changer for me because I have been struggling to get interest in the Ukrainian story through my World War II novels. And I published 3 of them, based on my family's experiences and on the experiences of the diaspora in World War II Ukraine. And for once, I was able to do something that was for kids. And I thought, I don't know how much better it can get. Seriously.
I think that Scholastic needs huge compliments in the fact that they reached out to
Yes.
two
Yeah.
authors and ask them to write about contemporary Ukraine. I think it shows tremendous social responsibility, especially
Mhm.
in this world right now. I don't know of another situation like this. And so I have deep respect for Scholastic and what they're doing. I was so thrilled when I found out that Chrystyna was writing Swimming with Spies. We had a Zoom about this way
Yeah.
early, didn't we? And
Well,
it's sort of, I tell everybody when I do presentations, I tell that Chrystyna has written the prequel to my trilogy
Mm.
because her book is just so fantastic.
it's
Yeah.
my turn to gush a little bit about Marsha as well, please, because
Yeah.
I actually knew Marsha long before this project came to fruition. We've been in touch over the years, and just kind of brushing past each other all the time. But because she publishes works on Ukraine, I thought, well, she's like the icebreaker, the ship that just goes through
Yeah.
the Arctic ice. She made the pathway possible. So I'm very, very grateful to you as well, Marcia.
I'm thrilled to be a part of this.
And
Mhm.
it's brilliant because the story with Swimming with Spies, I mean, as soon as you hook it up with animals, my God, you've
Yes,
opened it up. You've just opened it up to cross genre marketing here.
Yeah.
So
yes.
Why did you decide to write about Ukraine in the first place?
I got very lucky in 2020. I sent in a book about the Sudetenland, actually. The Girl from the Mountains is what it's called. And my editor really, really believed in this vision of creating a second book with me, based in Ukraine or set in Ukraine in World War II. And I went back to that first novel and I completely rewrote it and I really fictionalized it and I took stories that I hadn't implemented yet. And at the same time, I was also winning awards for my short stories based on World War II Ukraine, which is
Mm.
now a compilation, Souvenirs from Kiev, also picked up by Bookouture to actually raise money for charity. So that book is out there, and the money goes to Ukraine, to the United 24.
Mm.
So, yeah, I was doing this because I had been defending myself my entire life. I am not Russian. I don't speak Russian. No, Ukrainians are not Russian.
Mhm.
Spanish is not Italian, and Italians are not Spanish. I mean, this is the whole story that I was coming across. And the other thing, my brother put it very well. He said, we never got to eat bread without a story about how we even earned to eat that bread came
Yeah.
to the table as well. Like it was so present for us what our
Mhm.
grandparents, what my parents had to go through in order to give us the kind of life they wished for themselves in Ukraine,
Mhm.
but had to come to America or to Canada or to any other diaspora in order to get freedom. And I have been the voice for the underdogs since. This is every story I write is about the underdogs.
Mm.
And Ukraine is just a natural
God.
yes for
Yeah.
me.
And that's exactly the same as me. This is why I love you, Christina. I mean, this is like a fan club because Paulette, I have such admiration for you, and we're kindred spirits.
Yes.
But it was the same for me, but I came about it differently because I wasn't raised Ukrainian. I am of Ukrainian heritage. My husband, his first language was Ukrainian, and his both parents escaped World War II. They were displaced people they met in a DP camp. But I didn't know because my grandfather came to Canada before World War One, and my father, living on a homestead out west, had the Ukrainian beaten out of him by his teacher. And so he was traumatized by wanting to be white, by wanting to be English, and he didn't want his kids to identify as Ukrainian because he thought it would be too painful for them and they'd never get ahead. And my parents divorced, and my mother, who is of Irish heritage, potato famine Irish heritage, is the one who really instilled Ukrainian in me. And she actually came to Ukraine with me the first time I went. My father never went to Ukraine.
Wow.
Um, but she really encouraged me to know about my Ukrainian heritage. And but when I was trying to learn, because I wasn't part of the Ukrainian community in Brantford, I even couldn't find any books or stories or anything. And I just had this hole in my heart wanting to know. And my dad did tell me some stories. I mean, that was the impetus of writing Silver Threads about his father, but it was about the pain that he had and about why he was distanced from his Ukrainian heritage, the way that it was taken from him, and my grandfather too, because he escaped the internment camp and he always felt like he was in hiding, because he thought if he was arrested for something he didn't do the first time, just because of who he was rather than anything he did, it could happen at any time. And so it was that brought me. It was wanting to know more about my own heritage, but also because I am, and I think that anyone who is a writer is essentially an introvert, and the way that we deal with conversations is to ask questions rather than to talk. And my in-laws shared with me so much of what they went through in World War II that they never shared with my husband or my brother-in-law, not at all. And it was actually deeply painful for both boys to realize how much I knew that they didn't know. But I kept notes and I shared it with them all. But like they felt comfortable talking to me because I asked questions, and then I asked more questions, and then I broke it down and asked questions again. And but Making Bombs for Hitler and Stolen Girl, my first two World War II novels with Scholastic Canada first, and then Scholastic Inc., were inspired by my mother-in-law's experiences in World War II. And then other ones were inspired by what happened to my father-in-law. My mother-in-law lost half of her classmates to the Lebensborn program in World War II. She wasn't taken. That was when they took fair-haired, blue-eyed kids and tried to make them think they're German, and forget who they were and place them into Nazi homes.
Sound
She
familiar, Marsha? It's your book. You know?
I know, but this is what I was just about to say. So when they wanted me to write this, like when Scholastic asked me to write the trilogy, how could I not? Like once I finally got my head around it and realized I had to write it, I had to write about the kidnapped kids now, because
Mhm.
it's the same thing
It's the same
the
thing.
Nazis were doing in World War II with the Lebensborn program. This is exactly what the Russians are doing. They're stealing hundreds of thousands of children. They're making them into orphans. They're taking them and then they're changing them into Russians, where the boys will be soldiers and the girls will
Yes.
be mothers of Russians.
Listening is asking questions is what I do as well, and
Yes.
that's how you get the story out.
How you
Um,
get the story out. Yeah.
Out, yeah. And you have done a wonderful job with your two books.
Well, I hope that
What
you
about
don't mind
you, though,
mentioning,
Paulette?
yes, your book, because
Hello?
Okay, okay. We'll talk.
Paulette is also an author, and she has written Ukrainian Food Fare, which I actually have bought 6 copies
Thank
of.
you, thank
And
you.
it's authentic recipes from Canada's West Coast. And just before this whole session was starting, I was looking up desserts. So there, cream
Well,
cake,
okay, we'll come
pencil
back.
apple cake, in particular, because my mother-in-law made both of those.
I'm that's wonderful. So you both of you did a lot of research. Marsha, you said you 20 Days in Mariupol helped you, the film. And Chrystyna, you had done a lot of some interesting research as well with dolphins and about dolphins. Because did you
Mhm.
start out knowing anything about dolphins?
Besides what everybody else knows about them? No. I mean,
Yeah.
I was shocked and awed. It's, um, I think, for me, the research was twofold because I was trying to create a normal Ukrainian family in Crimea, in modern day Ukraine, which was totally different from the research I've done for World War II Ukraine.
Sure.
And I think making a discovery about modern Ukrainians and Ukraine was just a sheer joy. I cannot I can't describe it any other way. It was beautiful. I read as many books as I could, incredible books, literature and nonfiction, to kind of get that voice, you know, that zeitgeist. I was trying to capture that authentic, what do people talk about? How do they talk about it? You know, what is that voice that you hear?
And you
Um,
got it. You captured it because I'm from the West Coast. I traveled. I had the great good fortune to visit the Crimea. I didn't go to Sevastopol, but I was in Yalta actually, and
mhm.
it was 2008 was a different world, and it was really interesting to read your depiction of life in 2014 Crimea and
Mm.
compare it to to what I had, and it also has a like a coastal feel. You right, because, I'm from the so I felt like, yeah, I was right in there. I was right into your story. Was
I was very lucky that I had people from the diaspora who are from Crimea here,
oh,
so I was
great.
able to also interview them. The second part of that research was amazing. I mean, I wanted to be a veterinarian when I was growing up. What I realized in the end is that being a writer, you can do everything. Everything you've ever
Exactly.
dreamt of doing. This is how you get to play around with those different areas. And so I found I found a woman who was willing to talk to me. She's the head of the dolphinarium in a European dolphinarium. Um, and we talked, and the first call that we had was pretty funny because the very first thing she said is, "Look, Chrystyna, I'm willing to help you, and I'll point you in all the right directions. I'll get the contacts that you need for your research. But I'm telling you right now, I will only talk to you if you promise me that you are not going to do a free willy ending." Of course, I did not do a Free Willy ending, but she did give me a darn good idea of how I could end the book. I learned an awful lot about dolphins, an awful lot. And they were so generous, these people, so, so generous. They let me take my son and my godsons behind the scenes, and they were playing with dolphins, like up close and personal, and we got to get a sneak peek of of their new baby that they had not shown to the public yet. Because of the controversy about captured dolphins or non-captured dolphins, I have to tell you this all now, right now. Since 1968, there have been no
Really?
captured dolphins.
Uh-huh.
Um, so dolphinariums that belong to a particular association, they do not have captured wild dolphins any longer. They are breeding them, but there is still a lot of controversy about holding
Oh,
those dolphins.
oh.
So
And Marcia, you talk to people.
So I did a lot of different kinds of research. This was the first contemporary book I'd written in 20 years. And so I couldn't read books about what was going on because I was writing it as the war was unfolding. So I used a lot of different newspaper sources, including the Kiev Independent, Kiev Post, the New York Times was really good, documentary like 20 days in Mariupol, um, but and videos. But also, I did meet with a lot of refugees who had just come to Canada because we do have a lot of Ukrainian refugees, and in
Mhm.
particular, kids. And a lot of the kids, when they first came over, I helped with an art project where they could share their feelings. I would ask questions and they would share their feelings in response with drawings. And then I met with some of them and spoke through a translator, just to find out what their first days were like. And so it really informed me. And Christy and I were talking about how like Ukrainians now don't like dance around and wear embroidered shirts
Mhm.
all the time,
Right.
and live
although
in
I do now.
thatched thatched cottages, but so like I asked them what they left behind, what you left behind, what you took with you. And so that really informed me because the things that Daria and her mother take with her as they're running, because they didn't know that they'd never be back. So you have to stay true to that, and just that abject fear that they had. But using the newspaper accounts and all that kind of thing, what that was for was a structure of the novel, because I wanted to have each day the things that were really happening there to be the same as what was in my novel. I didn't change that because this is in some ways a documentary account, even though it's a novel, but it's too close, too easy to find out. So why wouldn't I just stick to the absolute reality of what was happening day to day to day? So even in terms of weaponry that was being used against Ukrainians changed, transformed as the days went on, and I kept even that. as closely as I could, as closely as documentary accounts would let me. So, it was a matter of immersing myself in it. The other thing that I really wanted to use was Putin was quite blatant about being proud of what he was doing, and as was Maria Lvova-Belova, the woman who coordinated the capturing of kids. And so I wanted to have them both have walk-in parts in the book. And so there
Mhm.
is a scene based on what really happened with the kidnapped kids being on a train, and it was filmed for TV in
Yeah.
Russia, where they're
Mhm.
coming off the train feeling totally dazed, feeling almost drugged, but also despondent because they've been taken from everything that's familiar. And the way that it was on the TV thing, and you can see it on YouTube and all that kind of thing, is like they were being saved. And
Yeah.
so to show that, but from a child's point of view, and then have Maria Lvova-Belova as a character, and the same thing, Putin trotted out real kidnapped kids onto the stage at a rally in
Mhm.
Moscow.
Correct.
And so that was a scene too. I wanted to use it because those two are infamous. They're both war criminals, and they're the only nonfiction characters. They're totally not fictionalized. And it's because they're both war criminals and they deserve the notoriety
Yeah.
and the light on what they have done. I don't really have to be a creative mind because I just have to document what's really there. The only creativity that I use in the book is in terms of making the composites of characters to protect, the actual identity of the people who are going through it now.
Yeah. So how do you do that? How do you create these characters?
So when I create a character, I think of what does this person want? What do they need? And what do they love? And in some ways, most characters start out to be me and then they change because they tell me. So I always start out with want, need, love.
Mhm.
And then they tell me. I try not to tell a character who they are. I don't even know how it happens. And I'm sure, Chrystyna, you have the same thing where you have to let the character tell you. It's like inspiration coming in rather than if you're too prescriptive with the characters, they don't ring true.
That's right. My first job is to find the voice. And I very often just go and start writing by hand. I go into a completely different area, a different environment, I should say. And I just start writing and I wait for that character. I have found actually that if the name is not correct, I won't hear the voice. I actually had a story with a protagonist or with an antagonist, and when it was time to write him, I couldn't, and I was completely stuck. I knew what I needed to happen, but I was completely stuck. And then somebody suggested changing his name. He said, "Well, what's his name?" And I said, "Pietro." And he said, "It doesn't sound like a stone. He doesn't. Peter is the rock. Why don't you change his name based on his character?" And I changed it to Angelo. And this is why I picked Sophia. Sophia or Scholastic suggested the name. They said I could do anything I wanted with the story. This was just the dolphins was the hook. And I ended up keeping the name because it spoke so much to me, just this name. And the very first moment
Wisdom.
that I
Yeah.
sat down with, yeah, and with the first moment that I sat down with pen and paper, she just started talking and she did not stop. And I've said this before to other people as well. I never look at those notes again. I just start writing. Then I type the book into the computer. But I've got it. I hear her and she's alive. And then I
I
go
don't
through that prescription. Then I go into the prescription. I'm like, okay, what do you love? What do you need? What's going to be your
right.
hurdle? And then I decide, okay, what are the blockades that I'm going to put in front of her? And she has to overcome those things.
And see, I don't even know what they're going to be. They just happen. So
Hmm.
because like once I know the wants, needs, and loves, and the way that I choose names is the names that are in that place at that time. So I actually look at birth, death records,
Mhm.
newspaper articles about people of the time, and I will only choose names that are actually in common usage of the era and time and
Yeah.
place that I'm writing in.
That's why I go to cemeteries for my World War II novels.
There you go. That makes sense. Ladies, it's been lovely chatting with you. I wish we had more time. And unfortunately, it is running out. Just wanted to find out, first of all, very quickly, what's next for you? You have, Marsha, you mentioned um, you've written a trilogy and Chrystina, and also where can we get your books?
The books are available in any bookstore, and in North America, they're available, and probably even worldwide. You'd be able to get Chrystyna's books or mine.
I'm working on the next novel, a middle grade novel, but it's going to be with the Kahovka Dam as the setting, with my protagonist's parents running a shelter
Okay.
for animals.
And my next one is coming out on October the 7th, and it's set in the Azovstal steel plant, and it's about the standoff. It's called Standoff, and it's about the standoff where they hold the Russians off from the entire city. It's the last stand in Mariupol, and it's from the.
I read it already, and it's fantastic.
Thank you so much, Marsha and Chrystina, for your time telling us about your stories and the stories behind your stories, and for writing them for us to read. I just want to express my admiration to both of you for the skill in which you highlighted the humanity that gets buried in news reports and social media comments on war. You both created character, settings, and circumstances that any reader can relate to and imagine themselves in. War is not an easy topic to discuss, let alone write about, and you both managed to convey the grim reality of war and yet keep alive the hope in the ultimate goodness of humanity in the midst of it. Well done, ladies. So thank you for writing your books when you had the choice not to.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.